I think we are good.
Okay, so hello everyone who joins us for this first video stream for the release of PopcornFX 2.8. So from now on, we will do a live stream for each release, detailing the new things, the new features, and yeah, that's basically it. So it's our first one. We don't do this one live. We'll do it for the next one, just because we're not sure if we're going to mess something up, as it's our first one. So please bear with us if something goes wrong. So hopefully in the next ones we'll have the chat. You'll be able to ask us questions, but this one we prefer to play it safe and do it offline first. So we'll start with highlighting a few new things on the website and regarding the online side of things. Then we'll dive into details of the new features of 2.8. We'll start up the editor and show you directly in the graphs and in the various effects what the new things are. And Paul will end up with new rendering and material related features. So, Hugo.
Yep, so hi, I'm Hugo. Just to start off, we'd like to show you something on the website. Yeah, okay. So as 2.8 is out, if you want to see the changelog, we have it on the website. You can click the news button here, and here you'll find in more detail. We just selected a bunch of items we would want to highlight during this video, but this is the full thing. Also, we'll not showcase this during this video, but we have a new AfterEffects plugin that will go in public early access soon. So you can check out the description here. Yeah, and we'll create some new video tutorials, so stay tuned for that. And along the AfterEffects plugin comes some documentation that you can find in community documentation, and at the very bottom of the tree view you'll find all plugins. So AfterEffects plugin is going to be the main entry point for After, and some new documentation pages are here also for Unity. Just as a reminder, right now the Unity plugin is not publicly provided. We provide it to studios on a per studio basis, basically. You can find more information as to why on the Unity plugin page. And for the AfterEffects plugin, it's available in links. You can find it without any issue. And finally, in terms of news, there is a new Discord server official for PopcornFX, where you can post any questions you have, and PopcornFX dev team and staff is here to help you. So I'll give the hand to Julien. Yeah.
So we will see a bunch of new stuff in 2.8. We'll start with some Nodegraph improvements. So we improved a bunch of nodes. It's mainly little usability improvements. So I'll quickly go through some of them. So the VRAN node, before 2.8, you had, if you wanted to have a random sphere greater than 1 in radius, you had to insert manually a scale node afterwards. Now in 2.8, we added a built-in scale, so you can very quickly scale that. The remap node before 2.8, so I'll show you in 2.7 how it looked like. So you could not edit the values inline. Whenever you wanted to remap something, you had to expose the pins. You had to create constant nodes. It was pretty painful. So now in 2.8, you can directly inline edit this directly in the node, and you don't have to create a bunch of other nodes. So you might notice here that you only have the allowed types. And this is also a new 2.8 feature. And when you create a template and you expose a template input, and you want to have your template accept different types, so you have the auto type. So this doesn't change, but in 2.8 you also have the exported type mask. So whenever you pick anything other than auto, you don't see it, but when you're in auto mode, you can then specify explicitly which types you want your template to accept, and it will only accept those types. So when you go back and select your template or your layer,
it's not named.
It's not named. Exactly. And I had a warning that I didn't look at. So yeah, when you go in there and you take a look at the dropdown, you only see those types. So we also improved the math nodes, the basic math nodes, add, sub, mul, div, and you can now specify any number of inputs. So let's say I want 6 inputs. Now I have 6 input pins for my add node, and this works for all basic math nodes.
This is cool.
Also, when you extract payloads from parent events, before 2.8 you had to use the extract node and to wire the parent event node inside to be able to access whatever payload the parent event was sending. Now in 2.8 this is optional, and you can just drop an extract payload node and it will work without the need for a parent event. And let me just drop a spawn on grid here. So one very cool thing we changed is the tooltips. So before 2.8, the node, the wire tooltips were very painful to use because they almost instantly disappeared. It was very hard to use. So here they don't disappear very quickly, but depending on the effects, it was very unreliable. So now in 2.8, we have fixed this, and you shouldn't have any more tooltip issues inside the graph. So same goes for the tooltips of the pins. It should now be much better. There is also a new local to world view in the graph. So this shows you the nodes that are either local space or world space. So in gray, it's the nodes that the graph analysis can't prove which space that they're in. So we still have a couple of improvements to do on that feature. It's pretty basic right now, but it's already able to show you the nodes that it's able to prove are either fully in world space or fully in local space. So here the blue means that it's in world space. So you know that here, this is world space. You're adding a value that also needs to be world space, and you're sending this as a world space position to the billboard node. If I were to do a world position to local, you see that now it appears green, and this tells me that this is local space. And when it's both local and world space, you'll have this intermediate teal value, color, sorry.
Teleport feature.
Yeah. Another very small quality of life improvement is regarding the annotations. So in 2.7, you basically could create annotations, but that's it. And in 2.8, you have a couple of new options, so you can make the annotations bigger or smaller. We also changed the way the nodes are selected inside the annotation. So before 2.8, whenever you wanted to select nodes inside an annotation, it would also select the annotation. So you would have to manually unselect the annotation using the control key, and this was pretty painful. Now in 2.8, this only selects the nodes that you want to select. It doesn't select the annotation. To select the annotation, you have to touch the title bar of the annotation, and it's the only place that is selectable. You also have a new post-it mode of the annotation, which drastically changes it. So this allows you to drop little comments in your graph with a different look. There is also a new renderers panel that show you the different renderers and how they are batched. So this is a bit more advanced, but it's useful when you try to improve batching to get better sorting or whatever. So here, if I change the texture to something else, let's say this. Now it will show me here two different renderers and highlight them when I hover them. Just because I have two textures, it now breaks the batching, and so I see two renders here. So regarding the debugger, we also have a bunch of new things. So when you select particles to debug them, here nothing is displayed. That's because the debugger still is only able to display the debug values of the evolved parts of the graph. So here everything is at spawn, so I don't see anything. So I'll quickly add a physics node to get some evolve going, and I will resume the same and add a small Excel like this. All right, so now if I pause and select, here I have my debug values. If I dive into the physics, I see the various debug values, and you have those two buttons that are new, which allow you to cycle through the various selected particles. So you see them highlighted in red. I don't know if this is very visible in the stream, but the currently selected particle appears red. And so when you have multiple ones and you cycle through them, you will see the debug values update inside the graph to show you the values for the currently selected particle. So this brings me to another new thing in 2.8, which is the physics node, which now includes the collision node. So this is kind of similar to what we had back in the day in version 1. It's just much easier to use than having to drop a separate collision node, wiring the position, the velocity inside. Now the physics just embeds everything, and you don't pay for it when you don't enable collisions. But when you enable collisions, yeah, it's as easy as that. You just have the collisions that work automatically. So yeah, I'm just reading my cheat sheet to make sure I don't forget anything.
We have to stay on track.
Yeah. So another small thing here. Does this work? Yes, it does. So before 2.8, the only values that were displayed in line here were the scalars. So were the scalars. We couldn't display the vectors. So yeah, here, for example, the life. This is a scalar. It was displayed before next to the pin when nothing was wired in, but if it was a float 3 like here, you couldn't see it. So this has changed in 2.8, and we also have a bunch of related settings in the effects editor, Nodegraph, and I have to remember where this. Oh, this here. Right. So if you check the show pin default values, it will always display the values even when they're the default value. So for built-in nodes, it's 0, but depending on the templates, it might be something else. So we don't display these by default just to have the graph lighter, but sometimes it can be a bit weird, like with a run node. If I, what's that noise?
Seems to be the camera. Right?
Maybe we'll have the camera that will stop working. Oh, is it on? It's on battery. It looks like the camera is on battery. Okay. First live stream surprises. maybe goodbye and see you next time. I don't know. Yeah, apparently our camera has switched to battery, and we don't know why. No, it's not. It's not that. Oh, it's this. It's definitely. What's that? Wait. Yeah, sorry about that.
Nice.
Good, it's fixed. Yeah. We forgot to plug the camera in the power supply.
Okay, so currently USB is not power
The power source, right?
Okay.
Okay.
That was fun.
So yeah, I was saying without this, you would have some nodes like the run node, which would only display one of the two values for no apparent reason. So if you know how it works, you know that this means that this is 0, but if you enable that, you'll have all the values all the time. Yep. Oh, and you also have another setting for the pin values, which allow you to always show the values, even when the pins do not have a default name. So here, for example, scale, because it has a non-default name, it wouldn't normally show the pin value, but here you can make it so. Oh, I closed it. So you can make it so that it always displays the value. Anyway. Did I forget anything? Oh yes, I did. So regarding the helpers to auto-export some values, so you had this auto-export button in the for the inputs that allowed you to, when you click it, it automatically exposes these inputs to the parent graph. So here I'm in a layer, so I'll get it directly on the layer node, but if you were in a template, it would expose it to the template. And here you see those two values that I automatically exported. But you can now also do that with the outputs. So you have those outputs here, and if I compare to 2.7, so this was the view of the outputs in 2.7. So you were just able to show them or hide them. And now in 2.8, you have the same little eye icon to show them and the auto export. So here, if I expose the event collide and go back into the layer graph, I now have my collision event that I can then use to wire into a new layer and do stuff with it to trigger child particles. I'll go back to this for the new templates later on. So now I'm quickly going to go through a few non-Nodegraph related editor improvements. So first thing we have the baked effects memory inspector. Where does it hide? Memory inspector here. So when you right click on an effect and you select memory inspector, it will bake the effect and show you a view of the usage of the baked file memory wise. So this is mostly a debug thing to make sure that when your baked effect files are too big, it shows you what takes place. So this is usually useful for GPU simulations. So here, if I switch this to use the GPU sim, and I save and go back here, and it doesn't change. That's probably because in my project settings, I only have a single oh, I don't even have one bake target. Okay, well, I'm not going to add one right now, but when you have bake targets that use a GPU sim, you will see the GPU memory in there. We also added edit, rewrite all assets to current version. So this was a pain usually when you upgraded a project to 2.8 or to the next version and had custom templates. You usually would want to resave all the assets, and there was no helper in the editor to do that. You had to open them all by hand and hit Ctrl S. So now you can just do rewrite all assets, and it will walk the entire project and rewrite everything, or you can select a bunch of assets and do rewrite assets to current version, and it will rewrite them. Pretty straightforward. Also in the help menu, we added a new advanced category, which allows you to directly go to the place the log file of the editor is stored. So this is useful if you have a bug and you want to send us the editor logs. You don't have to forage through your app data folders to find it. This will directly open it for you. In the project settings, there is also a new features section in editor features, which allows you to disable some of the sim interfaces that the editor supports if your production or your engine doesn't support it. For example, if you don't support the SceneWind sim interface, you can disable it here, and it will prevent its usage in the effects, and you won't have an effect that works in the editor but doesn't in-game when you bring it in-game. So this can be useful. And there is also a new experimental section with the experimental features we add each version. So here in 2.8, it's only this one. They are disabled by default, and in the next versions or the next upcoming versions, we enable them when we feel they're ready, but you can have a preview of them here. So there is also a new backdrop panel. Before 2.8, it was pretty painful to edit the backdrops. It was the scene properties panel. So here, for example, I have a background cube map, and this was basically a big giant property grid with all the backdrops in it. So we've split that into a nicer and cleaner thing. You can see that as a first step towards a proper scene view and scene graph, like we had in V1, where you could set up your backdrops, parent them, and have an actual test bed for your effect backdrops to preview what it would do with a say, a moving car on a track. So this isn't there yet, but it's the first step towards it, and it's also nicer to use. We also have in the effect preview, now we can select the effect properties. So before 2.8 you couldn't. Here it would just select the root graph, so you would have the properties of the root layer graph, which is basically useless. And the only way to edit that was to close the effect, to open it, touch nothing, and when you first opened it, the thing that was selected in the property grid was the effect properties. But then as soon as you selected anything else, you had no way to go back to these effect properties. So this is now fixed. And in 2.8, just select effect, you get the properties. So you can see here that we added a new capture bounds button that allows you to preview the effect bounds, or to capture the effect bounds, and you can preview the effect bounds by selecting. Oh, yes. Bounds mode, yep, I need to actually enable the bounds before I can capture them. Right. So yeah, here you can see the captured effect bounds. So obviously this isn't really a precise thing if you have the particles moving. Just going to quickly show that. Yeah, so here I can capture them, but every time I capture them, they change. And it doesn't guarantee that some particles won't get out of bounds, which is the case here. So to work around that, you can also, you have those shortcuts there, the plus and minus buttons, to quickly grow them. And of course, it won't be really accurate, but you can use that into your SDK integrations to quickly call effects if you don't want to pay the cost of dynamic bounds. And last but not least, regarding the big editor features, it's the asynchronous compilation of the graphs in the GPU sims. Well, it's always on, but it's mostly useful for GPU sims. So if I switch this to GPU, you can see the little compiling there that appeared. I will hide those bounds. And now whenever I change something, if you look here underneath the HUD, you will see, it's pretty quick because the effect is simple, but yeah, basically it doesn't block the editor anymore. So this was a very painful thing before 2.8, where whenever you had a layer with GPU sim enabled, it would basically freeze the entire editor until all the compute shaders of the sim were compiled. So if you were using D3D12 and the latest DXC compiler, it would be pretty fast, but if you were stuck on D3D11, it would be the old FXC, which is super slow. Anyway, it wasn't a really good editing experience. So this should now all be fixed. Yeah, that's actually a pretty big step that makes editing GPU enabled effects a lot more doable. I don't know if you guys have something to add on top of that, if I'm forgetting something.
No. You summed up pretty accurately.
Oh, thank you.
We agree it was a
the
pain.
goal is better performance.
Yeah. And yeah, in 2.8, we don't really show that in the stream because it's a bit hard to show, but we fixed a whole bunch of GPU sim related bugs. And the goal also to use the asynchronous compilation for GPU-enabled effects is to avoid the pipeline of creating your effect on GPU sim only, then enabling the GPU sim just to get it in engine and discovering that in fact there are bugs. So that's the main reason why we didn't catch a lot of the GPU sim bugs, because we ourselves weren't really editing effects with the GPU sim enabled because it was so painful. So now we should be able to have a much more stable and production ready GPU simulation overall.
Yeah, that's the goal for 2021. One of the main priorities.
More news coming for 2.9 regarding GPU sim. Yep, very quick thing. I'm saying since 20 minutes, a very quick thing. But so the curve editor, if let's say I take this preset, and do something like that. Here you have min limits and max limits. So let's say I set 0.2 in min limits and 1.3 in max limits. So you can see here that the preview of the curve shows you the cut part, and now this in the curve editor also shows you the cut parts. So when you move the control points, you see clearly what the actual sampled curve will look like, and the dotted parts show you where your unclamped curve is. But before 2.8, in case you did not use the curve max, I will show you what it looked like. So the auto zoom of the curve editor was taking this into account, but you had no way to see in there where the actual cuts were and what your curve would actually look like once sampled, except by looking at this preview, which only came in 2.7. So before 2.7, you were basically screwed using mins and maxes. So this is nice too. And we also added a whole bunch of helper templates, helper nodes to spawn on a texture. So this takes a texture. Let's say I'll take that one, and it outputs a position, which if I wire in here, it gives me a position from the UVs. And if I take the color and wire it in there, it
spread. Maybe again the GPU.
Yes, maybe. We still have bugs to fix in the GPU sim. Yeah. So we don't see much here, so I'll just crank that up. Yeah. Here we go. So this node is, as I said, mostly a helper. You can specify normal map, displacement maps. The density map is also pretty useful to avoid like killing particles that fall in dead areas you don't want. And if you open it, it does a whole bunch of computations that you would have to have done yourself by hand before. So this is a pretty nice helper if you need to do anything related to textures. So yeah, quick word maybe on the density. Right. So without density, I'll just unplug the color to show you. And no, actually, let me make this bigger. 10. Right. So without the density, you can see that the particles here are still spawned. We just don't see them because it's additive and their color is black. But whenever I use density, it allows to spawn the particles only on the regions of the texture that aren't black. So you can actually configure that. Oh, no, that's the displacement. Okay, maybe you can't configure it directly on the spawn on texture node, but when you use the sample density node, you can say which channel to use for the density, etc. So this is a pretty big saver on performance as well, because you don't have to spawn that much particles. Well, the usual technique would have been to check the texture color and kill the particle if it was falling on a black area. This is just a pretty neat helper to avoid that. So there is also a spawn on mesh that works basically the same way. It takes a mesh, it takes diffuse density maps, it outputs the position, the colors, a whole bunch of other things like the mesh sampling, but wrapped in a nicer set of controls. And last but not least, regarding this, you can now drag and drop assets directly inside the graph, and it will create a node. You can drag and drop multiple ones. It will create multiple nodes. And you can also drop them on the asset pickers, and it will set this asset for all the selected nodes. So now on the last part of the editor features, oh, actually not the last part. There are two last parts. So there are new LOD controls on the multiplier nodes. So this effect in the tutorials effects shows this. So you have a little icon on top of each fountain. Here it uses the effect backdrop to spawn on an 8x8 grid. So the actual effect is just this little jet of sparks and this little sprite on top of it, which is this effect position indicator. And this shows you either in green or red the effects that are completely out of the LOD and entirely disabled, the LOD region. So the red ones there means there is no emission whatsoever. It's just off. And the other ones, you can see as I move the camera forward, start spawning, and the multiplier node allows you to control the way the emission rate falls off based on the distance. So you can either do a hard cutoff, so you can see here I have around 35,000 particles, and whenever I move out they just instantly stop spawning or start spawning. It's the same rate whether they're close to the cutoff limit or close to the camera. Here if I pick linear, it will smoothly go from the full emission rate down to whatever mean emission, LOD flux at cutoff value I have here. So if I increase this, it will increase the rate, etc. So you have a bunch of controls. You can even plug a custom curve inside to control the way the fall-off works. So yeah, pretty versatile. And last feature I'm going to show you for real this time is the prewarm of the effect. So I'll just take that one. So effect pre-warming had to be done before 2.8 by hand in the SDK. It was pretty messy. You didn't really have a clean built-in way to do it. So now in the SDK, you can, when you instantiate a new effect, you can directly say pre-warming by this value, and per effect, you can say when pre-warm is enabled, you can say by how much you want to pre-warm and the number of sub-steps it needs to take, the max tick count, etc. And it will figure out the best way to pre-warm it. So let's say I want 2 seconds of pre-warm, and when I reset, it instantly goes forward 2 seconds instead of starting from 0. So this is better seen with the timeline So here, when I reset, you see the current playback cursor, and whenever I enable the prewarm, you will see the playback cursor being 2 seconds forward in time compared to the actual scene time cursor, which is slightly hard to see red. I don't know if you'll see that in the stream, but yeah, anyway, that's the prewarm feature. And that's all for me. I'll let Paul show you some rendering and material related features.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm Paul. I will show you what we improved regarding rendering in this 2.8 version. So let's start with the new editor material we've made, which is the lit and tinted distortion material. So if I go to billboard feature example effect, so here you can see the legacy material, legacy distortion material. I mean, it's the new one, but used without the new features. I will just disable the background, the mesh, and put some cube map in order to better see what's going on. Let's take this one, for example. So now what changed is that the distortion material can also be lit, allowing to do glass-like material using normal map as a distortion map. So I will check the lit feature and I will change the distortion map to this normal map. So right now we have only distortion occurring. I will remove the blur by scaling the blue component of the color by 0. This is something, this is how the blur worked for long. And I will put a normal map, choose the same. Maybe it's easier just to copy paste the path. Okay. And I will set it to transparent, set some lower roughness. And there you go. You can see that the material is both refractive and lit. Okay. It also allows tinted material. It means that the material will multiply the background color like tinted glass. So this is a feature here, and like that. So tells a bunch of cooler stuff. We also have new post-processing effect. We do a quick overview of those, even if I suppose in the stream that will not be very obvious to see. So within the editor preference, in rendering and post effect, you can now see that we added Vignetting, Dithering, and FXAA. So Vignetting has some basic control and allows you to simulate like camera vignetting. So if I scale this, not the saturation, sorry, but color, okay, to make it more obvious. So for example, there I have like a very cheesy pink
damage effect.
Oh yeah, actually, all damage effect.
You are in pain.
We also added a dithering post effect. So on the stream, it's for sure not visible at all. But what happens is that with very light, with very low frequency gray gradients, you would often see gray bandings due to 8-bit displays. So now with the 8-bit dithering, we dither those colors in order to avoid that. So it's quite nice, but probably
definitely won't see it there. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But it's on by default because it's quite improve the general feeling of the editor, especially with dithering and background gradients. And the third one is the FXAA, which is like a fast approximate anti-aliasing algorithm. It's not on by default because it has a quite downside, especially on the grid, but you can test it, and it works pretty well with the mesh and the opaque geometry in general. Yeah, we also have a new sort-related feature. We'll try to showcase that using the sorting example. So for now, one way to handle sorting with a non-batch renderer. So if I go to the renderer, so here I have two not batched renderer. So one way to handle this sorting was to use the global sort override. But it has a downside. I will show it to you by adding a third render. Simple billboard, nice alpha blend. So because of the global sort override, the pebbles are always rendered over the smoke. But again, because of that feature, those are also always rendered in front. So yeah, before, in front, sorry, after others render, which we don't want there because the white billboard should occlude it. So instead of using the global sort override, you can now use a CameraSortOffset, which will offset the renderer in distance metric along the camera axis. So let's put a 0.25 offset. So it means that the pebbles are now rendered as if they were 0.5 units, 0.25 units closer to the camera as they really are. So it solves the sorting the same way with the smokes here, but it's also well sorted with this third joker. So depending on how your effect behaves and how your renderer are spatially related to each other, it might be a good solution to handle non-batched renders. Yeah, and yeah, at last we also have, so I said, Hugo and Julien, our focus now is to like make the GPU pipeline, the best possible GPU pipeline, and make it like as good as the CPU one. So we added a bunch of new rendering feature related to this, and one noticeable, one worth noting is the GPU mesh particles. So if I switch to the sim location, this is a GPU layer with a simple physics solver. And yeah, it's now supported with mesh renderer, which wasn't the case in the previous version. So basically it supports all the features the CPU mesh renderer supports, such as mesh IDs that can be used for LOD, and also enabled per particle enabled pin, which we don't see here because the enable is global to the layer, but you get the point. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
And the mesh ID, just a small detail, the mesh ID is a pretty cool thing to avoid having multiple renderers that you need to show or hide depending on the state. You can very easily like batch keyframe animations if you want, or things like that, or even debris, and have them animate by switching the mesh ID.
Yeah, I'm just going to close this one because the secret fairy tells me that it's making the stream lag a lot.
Ah.
Yeah. Maybe better now.
Killing the GPU.
Yeah, it's slowing the stream a lot currently, GPU-C.
Okay, I
Nice.
guess
Okay,
we've
that wraps it up.
covered it.
Well,
I was going to say thanks for joining us, but as it's not yet a real live stream, it will be for the next time. So thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching, and see you next time. We'll try to do this more often to go in depth for features we'd like to present. Okay.
And see you on the Discord.
Yep.
Yeah. Discord.